10 Hollywood stars buried near someone who hated them. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe died on August 5, 1962, and was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, California, in crypt number 24, in the Corridor of Memories. For years, her grave was a quiet, intimate space visited by fans who genuinely loved her. Then in 1992, something changed. Hugh Hefner paid $75,000 to purchase the crypt directly beside hers, announcing publicly that spending eternity next to Marilyn was too sweet to pass up. The problem was that Monroe never consented to any of it, in life or in death. Hefner had built his entire empire on her image without ever paying her for it. In 1953, he purchased nude photographs of her for $500 without her knowledge, and used them to launch the very first issue of Playboy. Monroe later said she never received so much as a thank you, and that she had to buy a copy of the magazine herself just to see what had been done with her image. She never met Hefner in her lifetime. He never sought her consent for any of it, and yet when he died in 2017, he was placed directly beside her, in a spot he had quietly claimed for himself a quarter-century earlier. Marilyn Monroe starred in Some Like It Hot, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and The 7-Year Itch, and won a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy. Marilyn Monroe was born on June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles, California. She died at just 36 years old. Joey Ramone died on April 15, 2001, and his ashes were scattered, but his official memorial is at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, the same grounds where his bandmate and one of the people who hurt him most, Johnny Ramone, is also memorialized. Joey and Johnny had co-founded the Ramones together in 1974, building one of the most influential punk bands in the history of rock music. For years they were brothers in everything but name. Then Johnny did something Joey never forgave. He began a relationship with Linda Danielle, the woman Joey had been dating and was deeply in love with. Johnny eventually married Linda, and she remained his wife until his death. Joey and Johnny continued performing together for more than 2 decades after that betrayal, standing on the same stage night after night while barely speaking to each other off stage. Bandmates later described the tension as something that never once fully lifted. Joey reportedly never stopped loving Linda, and the wound of what Johnny had done stayed with him until the end of his life. Despite that private heartbreak, Joey helped create some of the most important music of the punk era, including Blitzkrieg Bop, I Wanna Be Sedated, and Sheena is a punk rocker. Joey Ramone was born on May 19, 1951 in Forest Hills, New York. He died at the age of 49. Johnny Ramone died on September 15, 2004, and is memorialized at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, where a striking bronze statue marks his resting place. Not far from him in the same cemetery is the grave of D.D. Ramone, one of the founding members of the band, and a man whose relationship with Johnny had grown deeply complicated by resentment and personal pain. D had been one of the most creative forces behind the Ramones, writing many of the band's most beloved songs. But his relationship with Johnny was fractured by the same situation that destroyed Johnny's friendship with Joey. The betrayal over Linda, whom Johnny had taken from Joey, cast a shadow over the entire band. Dee, who was closer to Joey, found it increasingly difficult to remain loyal to a group where that wound sat permanently unaddressed. Dee eventually left the Ramones in 1989 and attempted a solo rap career, a decision that was widely criticized and that Johnny reportedly found embarrassing. The two never fully repaired what had broken between them before Dee died of a heroin overdose in 2002. 2 years before Johnny was the musical engine behind the Ramones, responsible for the relentless downstroke guitar style that defined the band's sound across more than 2 decades of performing. Johnny Ramone was born on October 8, 1948, in Long Island, New York. He died at the age of 55. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. died on December 12, 1939, and was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, where an elegant reflecting pool and a formal monument mark his grave. Buried in the same cemetery is his son, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., a man who spent much of his life navigating the complicated pain of having a father who was largely absent from his childhood and who kept him at a careful distance for years. When Fairbanks Sr. divorced his first wife and rose to fame alongside Mary Pickford, his son from that first marriage was left largely on the periphery of his father's glamorous new life. Fairbanks Jr. grew up watching his father become one of the most famous men in the world, while feeling the quiet sting of not being fully part of it. When he eventually pursued his own acting career, he often had to contend with comparisons to a father who had never fully invested in their relationship. Their dynamic was never openly hostile in public, but those close to both men understood that the warmth between them was limited, and the distance between them real. Fairbanks Sr. had been one of the original superstars of silent cinema, starring in The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, and The Thief of Baghdad, and co-founding United Artists alongside Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. was born on May 23, 1883, in Denver, Colorado. He died at the age of 56. Cecil B. DeMille died on January 21, 1959, and was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. Also buried in the same cemetery is Jesse L. Lasky, his original business partner, and the man with whom he had built one of the most important film companies in early Hollywood history, before their partnership collapsed in bitterness and professional humiliation. DeMille and Lasky had co-founded the Jesse L. Lasky feature play company together in 1913, which eventually became Paramount Pictures. For years, they were among the most powerful men in the industry. But as Paramount grew and financial troubles mounted during the Great Depression, their relationship deteriorated sharply. Lasky was forced out of the company he had helped create in 1932, a departure that he felt deeply and publicly for the rest of his life. The two men who had once stood at the founding of a major studio ended up sharing the same cemetery ground decades later, their professional falling out never fully resolved, and the company they built together long since moved on without either of them. DeMille had become one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors, known for epic productions including The Ten Commandments, Cleopatra, and Samson and Delilah, and he remains one of the most influential figures in early American cinema. Cecil B. DeMille was born on August 12, 1881, in Ashfield, Massachusetts. He died at the age of 77. Clark Gable died on November 16, 1960, and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. His own request was simple and unwavering. He wanted to be placed beside Carole Lombard, his third wife, who had died in a plane crash in 1942, 18 years before his own death. His fifth wife, Kay Spreckles, whom he was married to at the time of his death, had no choice but to accept that her husband had arranged to spend eternity beside another woman. Lombard's death had devastated Gable in ways he never fully recovered from. Despite remarrying twice after losing her, he never stopped speaking about her as the great love of his life. Friends said he carried the grief of her loss quietly but constantly, and that no relationship after her ever came close to filling the space she had left. Kay Spreckles was later buried near him after her own death. But the arrangement Gable had made years before his passing made his feelings unmistakably clear. He had planned his own burial around a woman who had been gone for nearly 2 decades. Gable had been one of Hollywood's most iconic leading men, starring in Gone with the Wind, It Happened One Night, and Mogambo, and winning the Academy Award for Best Actor for It Happened One Night in 1935. Clark Gable was born on February 1, 1901, in Cadiz, Ohio. He died at the age of 59. Jean Harlow died on June 7, 1937, and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, in a crypt that her former co-star and lover William Powell paid for out of grief and devotion. Also buried in the same cemetery are people connected to the world that Harlow had navigated, including the studio system that had simultaneously made her a star and left her. Surrounded by people who failed her profoundly when she needed help, most Harlow collapsed on the set of Saratoga in 1937 and was found to be suffering from kidney failure. What followed was a delay that many film historians have since described as a preventable tragedy. Her mother, a devoted Christian Scientist, refused to allow conventional medical treatment for as long as possible, relying on faith healing instead while her daughter's condition worsened. By the time Harlow was finally admitted to a hospital, it was too late. She was 26 years old. The woman who had become one of Hollywood's brightest stars died in large part because the people responsible for her care chose belief over medicine, and a studio system that depended on her never intervened in time. Harlow had been one of the most electrifying presences in early Hollywood, starring in Platinum Blonde, Red Dust, and Dinner at 8, and redefining what a female screen star could be. Jean Harlow was born on March 3, 1911, in Kansas City, Missouri. She died at just 26 years old. Errol Flynn died on October 14, 1959, and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Also buried in the same cemetery is Jack Warner, the powerful head of Warner Brothers who had controlled Flynn's career for years and with whom Flynn had one of the most openly combative relationships in Hollywood history. Flynn had been one of Warner Brothers' biggest stars throughout the late 1930s and 1940s, but his relationship with Jack Warner was defined by resentment on both sides. Flynn believed Warner underpaid him, cast him in roles beneath his abilities, and treated him as a commodity rather than an artist. He fought publicly and repeatedly for better contracts, better roles, and more creative control, and lost almost every battle. Warner, for his part, reportedly had little patience for Flynn's lifestyle, his legal troubles, or his increasingly unreliable behavior on set. By the time Flynn's career had declined and his health had deteriorated, the studio that had built him had long since moved on. Their mutual contempt was well documented during their years together, making their shared cemetery ground a quietly ironic footnote to a professional relationship neither man had particularly enjoyed. Flynn had captivated audiences in The Adventures of Robin Hood, Captain Blood, and the Seahawk, becoming one of the most charismatic action stars of Hollywood's golden era. Errol Flynn was born on June 20th, 1909, in Hobart, Australia. He died at the age of 50. Natalie Wood died on November 29, 1981, and was buried at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, California. Not far from her in the same small cemetery is the grave of Bob Crane, the Hogan's Heroes actor whose death in 1978 was ruled a homicide that was never solved. Two people in the same quiet cemetery, both of whose deaths raised questions that official investigations never fully put to rest. Wood's death was originally ruled an accidental drowning off Catalina Island, but that ruling was later changed to drowning and other undetermined factors after a reinvestigation decades later. Robert Wagner was named a person of interest, but no charges were ever filed. The full story of what happened that night on the yacht has never been officially resolved. Crane had been found beaten to death in a Scottsdale apartment. A suspect was charged but acquitted, and no one has ever been convicted of his murder. Two graves a few feet apart, each marking the end of a life that closed with more questions than answers, in a cemetery that most visitors walk through without knowing the weight of what rests there. Wood had been one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, starring in Miracle on 34th Street as a child, and later in West Side Story, Rebel Without a Cause, and Splendor in the Grass. Natalie Wood was born on July 20th, 1938, in San Francisco, California. She died at just 43 years old. Spencer Tracy died on June 10, 1967, and was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, alongside his estranged wife Louise Tracy, the woman he had been legally married to for 44 years, but had not lived with for the last 26 of them. The woman he had actually shared his life with, Katharine Hepburn, was not permitted to attend his funeral. His family made that decision, and Hepburn respected it in silence. Tracy and Hepburn had been together since 1941, one of Hollywood's most famous and enduring partnerships both on screen and off. But because Tracy had never divorced Louise, and because his Catholic faith made divorce something he would not pursue, Hepburn remained permanently on the outside of his official life. She was his partner in every meaningful sense except the legal one. When he died, It was Louise who stood at the grave. Hepburn reportedly waited at her own home and received the news alone. She later wrote about that day with characteristic restraint, but those who knew her understood what it had cost her to stay away. Tracy had been one of the greatest actors of his generation, winning back-to-back Academy Awards for Captains Courageous and Boys Town, and receiving 7 nominations in total. Spencer Tracy was born on April 5, 1900, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He died